What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're working on the 2004 Honda Accord again. This is the EX with the V6, the J30 engine, and we're going to be replacing the valve cover gaskets as well as the spark plug tube seals. So stay tuned, let's get started. Alright, so now that we have everything set up, we're going to be dealing with a lot of electrical connections here, so I like to just disconnect the battery. That way nothing can short out or just confuse, the computer doesn't confuse itself or anything. So obviously we got some corrosion going on here, and wow, okay, a lot of corrosion going on, so we're gonna have to, I'm gonna leave this off so I remember, but definitely gonna have to clean that because that is definitely not going back together the same way. Alright, next 10mm, let's get this air duct off, that way we can get to the intake. Alright, just loosen it up. It's got a few electrical connectors in here. I'm just gonna unplug that. Alright, so it looks like these can move on that end, which means as long as there's nothing around it, you can pull on these once you get it out, I think. Alright, so let's just take this whole air box out because it's going to be a lot easier to take the air duct off with the top of the air box out of the way. It's got 4 bolts, one in each corner. They are captive bolts, so they don't come out. You just have to loosen them. Alright, now that that's unbolted, let's just try to remove this whole assembly. However it comes out. Alright, well, that's broken. Gonna have to get a new one. Don't leave your air filter here, because if you drop something on top of it, and then you turn on the engine, whoop, gets sucked right in. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is just continue unplugging any electrical connectors that you see. Just be very gentle, because the wires are old. There we go. This can stay with the car. I'm just gonna pull off the vacuum hose, probably off of the intake right here. There it goes. And then we're going to unbolt it. It's got a 10mm back there. It's got another 10mm underneath. There we go. I'm going to actually thread those back in, just so I don't forget where they go, because we're going to have a whole lot of 10mm bolts in a little while, so I don't want to risk forgetting where they go or lose them or whatever, so I'm just going to thread them back in. Alright, next it's going to be time to unbolt the throttle body. This has coolant going through it, so I don't want to mess with disconnecting coolant lines and refilling the coolant and so on. So I'm just going to unbolt it. That way we can separate it from the intake. So get your 12mm ready. And there are 4 fasteners in total, 2 nuts on the top and 2 bolts on the bottom. Just crack them all loose, and then we'll take them off completely. Alright, that is separated. I'm going to leave this gasket on here. I was going to take it off. If it does come off, I suggest you take it off and put it in a safe place unless you have a new one, but it's okay to reuse those. Just be very gentle with them. Don't scratch them or scuff them up or anything, because they'll make a huge vacuum leak. But if they're in good condition like this one, it's fine. You can just reuse them. Like I always say, put your fasteners back so that you don't lose them. Alright, so before we go any further, I'm going to take off this cover here. I'm going to take off all the vacuum lines and connections that are still attached to this upper intake. And then we're going to take off this top plate here. That way we can get access to the bolts that hold on the upper intake. So we got this cover right here. You just spin these 90 degrees and should pull right off. I'm going to put that to this side right there. There we go. That exposes this area. We got a vacuum hose over here. Oh, I just pinched my own finger. Just give it a quick little twist. Don't put a lot of pressure on it when you do this, just a little bit. And that should come right off. There we go. Nothing here, nothing here. Let's go to the back. Alright, so in the back we have this little tiny hose. Unplug that. We have a 10mm right here. I'm going to do it with the gun because that's what I have on me. Take that off of here. Put the bolt back in so you don't lose it. And just let this gently dangle. We got a brake booster vacuum here. Alright, so looking around, I don't see anything that is still holding this upper intake on. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna get a vacuum. I'm gonna vacuum all these little areas here because I don't want anything to fall in once we take this plate off. All right, now that that's all cleaned up, let's get all these 10mm bolts out of here. There should be 12 of them. 2 of them are actually gonna be nuts. So this one right here and that one will be nuts. At this point, it would be great to have one of these magnet trays. That way you can just stick your hardware to it. All right, so there's that. Smells like engine oil in here. Now we've exposed all the upper intake bolts. So let's get to those. All right, so the upper intake is gonna be held on by a bunch of 12mm bolts. So just get your 12mm socket. Now for this, I will crack them loose with the ratchet, and then I'm gonna use the impact to take them out the rest of the way. Now, if you noticed on this plate right here, I didn't actually go from outside in for removing the hardware, but it's fine. It's just a cover plate. It doesn't matter a whole lot. For this though, you wanna make sure that you go from the outside in. Need more leverage. Got myself a bigger tool. Now for this, there's gonna be 7 bolts and 2 nuts, so 9 pieces of hardware in total. There we go, that moves around. Not sure if you heard it or not, but I did hear the intake gasket crackling, which is a sign that it's detaching from the lower intake, which is good. All right, now go ahead and just take all these out. And again, if you have a magnet tray, this is super useful. All right, it's time to lift up the intake. At this point, you wanna double, triple, quadruple check that nothing is connected on it anymore. You don't wanna rip any wires out or vacuum hoses, and just gently wiggle it. If you forget to take out one bolt, that doesn't help. Now, pull it up. Oh, power steering hose is in the way. This is in the way right here, and instead of trying to pry it around it, I'm just gonna lift the hose up and out. There we go. Here is our upper intake. This is also good to reuse. If you have access to a new one, you can go ahead, but this one is in perfect condition, so it's a steel gasket. I'm just gonna reuse it. At this point, we have access to our valve covers. I'm only gonna show you how to do the front because the rear is identical. It's just that it's back there. So let's get started with the front valve cover. So next, we're gonna have to take off these 3 coils. Before we get started though, I wanna cover up these intake runners just so nothing falls down there, because at this point we have an open engine. So I don't want anything bad to happen. I'm just gonna shove some paper towels down here and obviously not forget to take them back out. All right, so you just wanna gently cover up the hole with something, whether it's a cloth or a paper towel or whatever it might be. You just wanna prevent debris from getting down there. Perfect. All right, next you want to remove these 3 ignition coils. You do that with a 6mm Allen, unless you have something different, in which case figure it out. Before you pull them off though, I like to unplug them just when they're a little more secure in place. I'm just going to go ahead and put these on the rear valve cover right here temporarily. And for the bolts, you guessed it, screw them back in. At this point, we're gonna undo everything that's over the valve cover. So this wire harness is gonna have to come out. It just has some plastic clips. So like this one, you pull up on it and it should pull away. This one, same thing except in reverse. So you push down, should pull away. It looks like it's bolted onto the alternator, so in order to clear it, I'm actually just going to disconnect the alternator right here. To do that, there's a 10mm right there. Next we have this 12mm power wire right here that comes off the alternator, so remove that, but be very gentle because the stud is brass, so it's very soft and it can break inside. Do this by hand and very gently. Oh, there we go. Pull this wire off. I'm going to start the nut back on just so I can make sure it's safe, secure. All right, at this point I realize it's actually going to be pretty easy to clear this valve cover. I don't have to unplug this connection right here, which I can't even see where the clip is for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unhook this O2 sensor connection from here just to give this harness a little more slack, and then we should be good to go. Now to do that, this connection has a plastic clip right back here. You have to just squeeze the 2 tabs on it and then push it out. Or if it doesn't work, like it doesn't for me, just cut it and just zip tie it back later. Make sure not to cut the harness. There we go, that did it. Oh, unplug this. Just remember not to pull on any wires. All right, at this point, it's a great idea to remove the dipstick because you might break the top off. It's just plastic and they break often. At this point, we are clear to start removing the valve cover bolts. They're 10 millimeter and there should be 5 of them. I'm gonna break them loose with the ratchet and then remove them all the way with the impact. At this point, you can remove these if you'd like. These grommets will just pull right off. Sometimes you gotta tap them out, sometimes you don't. There we go. And now for the valve cover itself. Again, you want to make sure that everything is clean around here. You're not dropping any sort of debris in there. And what you want to do now is use a rubber mallet. I don't have one, so I'm going to use the wood end of this hammer and just grab onto the valve cover and tap it. There we go. Now gently lift it out of the way. There's the valve cover and the gasket. All right, so I brought my valve cover out of the garage just because it's easier to work with. And at this point, we're gonna match up the gaskets and make sure that they are the correct ones. So they do have little notches. So this matches up like that. 1 notch here, 1 notch here, 1 notch here. So perfect. This is the one for this side. So let's remove this one. There we go. Now at this point, you'd inspect this little channel here and make sure it's good. This one's perfect, so there's nothing for me to do on it. So I'm just gonna install the new gasket. Start with these 2 notches so that you can make sure it's fully lined up as it should be. And just go from there, press it all around. Some of you might ask, is it necessary to clean the inside of this? It's not necessary. Would it look prettier? Yeah, but doesn't do anything. The best thing you could do is just regular oil changes, really. That's what's going to prevent this. I mean, I don't want to scrape too much at it because I don't want to create loose fragments in here, but 255,000 miles is pretty much what you'd expect this to look like with your average oil change. It's not like it was serviced early or anything, so it's decent. There's worse. All right, now for these spark plug tube seals right here, the best way to get them off of here is to put your screwdriver underneath and gently pry up. So I'm gonna try and demonstrate it right here. There we go. That's one. Just make sure you don't put pressure inwards on these walls right here. Just put pressure upwards so it can pop out. And then you can just walk it right out of there. It helps if you twist a little bit at the same time. There we go. All right, I have here some paper towels. I'm just gonna clean off the area. You can tell which ones are starting to leak. That one is dry, that one's super wet, this one is a little bit wet, so you can tell which ones are starting to give out. This is the important part. You want to install it with this lip towards you, so towards the underneath of the valve cover, not towards the outside. You want the groove to be facing outside. Next, I'm going to get a little bit of silicone paste and just put it right around this lip right here where the seals are going to press in, just to give it a little bit better of a sliding opportunity. Usually you don't want to install rubber seals dry. Just line it up and you should be able to start it by hand. There we go. You want to just make it flush with this lip right here. I actually was able to press it in all the way by hand. If you need a socket to do it, that's fine too. Just be gentle. And like I was saying, you don't want to press it down all the way because it can go more than this. And to take it back out, well, you chance ruining it. So just make sure you make it flush with this lip, and that's it. Leave it at that. Last one. Having the silicone paste on really helped because it makes it slide in easy. No binding or no rough areas. All right, valve cover gasket is on. Double checking that it's Still good. There we go. Spark plug tube seals are good, so let's go install it in the car. At this point, what you want to do after you've finished putting the valve cover gaskets and the spark plug tube seals on is you want to clean the area where the valve cover is going to mate with the head. In this case, in some cases, the head is split, so it has two different casings basically. In this case, it's all one piece, so you don't have to worry about putting down any RTV or cleaning any old RTV. Sometimes the timing belt or timing chain area is split from the head, so that's when you need to clean up old RTV and put new stuff on. But in this case, it's all one piece, so all we have to do is basically just clean up the surface so that the gasket can sit flush, and then just reinstall. You especially have to pay attention in these areas right here where there's a lot of buildup. Make sure you fling that away from the engine. Obviously that applies to everything, but especially here, make sure you fling that away from the engine, not into the engine, obviously. So here we go. I'm using a new-ish pry bar. It's pretty sharp. You probably can't tell, but it does have a sharp tip. You just want something that is able to scrape without damaging the surface. This is aluminum, and I'm using a metal pry bar, but I'm just going to be careful. You can use a razor blade if you want, or an actual scraper. Just make sure that the scraper isn't too sharp, because it can dig into the aluminum. I mean, anything can. Even a screwdriver, if you clean up a screwdriver, as long as it's flat and you don't dig up the surface right here, should be good to go. First, I'm going to go over with a paper towel and just absorb all of this extra oil and just try to fling away any debris that's stuck on here. All right, at this point, everything is clean. I took advantage of the fact that the valve cover is off and I cleaned it up, cleaned all the old oil off. It's important to do this because you want to know if there are future leaks. You don't want to just guess. At this point, you want to put the valve cover on, match up the spark plug tube seals, and then just give it a little push, and that should seat them in perfectly. So when it comes to these fasteners that hold the valve cover on, they have little grommets that help seal everything. This is otherwise an open gaping hole into the head. The kit that I'm going to link down in the description that I bought comes with these. I recommend that you replace them. I mean, why not? You're doing the job, might as well. They are a little tricky to replace, so as you can see, the new ones are way thicker, and that's because these have been compressed for so long. So obviously you want some new gaskets, that way it seals up with your new parts. And the way you take these off is it won't just fall through, because they're captive on here, sort of, to some extent. So what you do is you separate this metal piece from the rubber piece, you cut the rubber piece off, and then the metal piece will definitely slide through. It has a hole that's big enough for this area right here, this shank. So to put the new ones on, you basically just press them on until they slide on. I'm not going to do it right now because you still need to get this off, but basically that's what you do. It's pretty straightforward, just a little tougher than it had to be. Cut this, take it off, press the new one on. All right, just to demonstrate, just be careful with this because it is a dangerous process, but you basically just want to separate these. There we go. Once you've separated them, go ahead and cut this one. Obviously make sure you have nice and thick gloves on just in case the cutting device slips. Go ahead and peel it off. And this slides right off. This is trash now. And for the new one, it's not going to slide in very easy with just dry like this. So either lubricate it with some silicone paste or some sort of, you can also lubricate it with just a tiny bit of brake clean or some carb cleaner. I'm going to opt for some silicone spray, and I'm just going to spray it on the inside of this. That's going to lubricate it, and it's not going to damage the rubber at all. Oh, that's separated. That's good. There we go. It takes a lot of force, just so you know. It's normal. But once you get it on, don't worry if these separate. You can squish them back together usually once you tighten the bolt up. So just do this for all 5 of them, and then we can put the bolts in. All right, so now that we have the gaskets replaced, we can put on these bolts. Now there is one short one, and that goes up here. All the other long ones go, well, all around. So go ahead and start them all in. I'm just gonna bring them close, then I'm gonna bottom them all out, then I'm gonna snug them, then I'm gonna torque them. All right, so I started these all by hand. I didn't want to use any sort of electric tool because I didn't want to cross thread them by accident and ruin the threads. So they're all bottomed out. I'm gonna go from the center out and just snug them just by hand. I'm only using the head of the ratchet, so I'm not putting a whole lot of torque on them. You'll notice that as you tighten some of them, others will loosen up just because the valve cover is squishing down, so that's totally normal. All right, let's grab the torque wrench and find torque specs. So the torque for this valve cover is 104 inch-pounds. That converts to 8.6 foot-pounds. So I'm just gonna go 9 foot-pounds on my torque wrench, and that should be pretty much what we need. Now, obviously that's an extremely low number, so it's basically just snug and then tight. If you don't have a torque wrench, it's no big deal. You can just snug it, tighten it, and you should be all set. Again, going from the middle out just to seat the gasket properly. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to double check them just to make sure that they didn't loosen up. Before we get the ignition coils in, actually, I'm just going to put this harness back here. That way, first of all, we need to plug them in. Second of all, it's going to be out of my way if I put it here, and I want it to be out of my way. There we go. Snug that up. Now let's get the alternator connected back. All right, so for this, I'm just going to bottom it out and then snug it. This is a very delicate bolt, like I said before. It doesn't need to be super tight. Snug it, and that should be good enough. Obviously, if that area is not clean, it has corrosion on it, definitely clean it, because that's your alternator. It's super important. And make sure you put that boot back on so it can make a nice watertight seal. This would obviously be a great time to inspect and replace your spark plugs. I do have a video about that on this car, so if you are interested, check it out. Now let's reinstall and reconnect the ignition coils. I am reinstalling them in the same cylinder that they came out of. It doesn't matter 100%, but it is good to keep them where they are. I like to do that just in case there are slight differences in them that the computer has already learned. So I just like to put things back where they came from. That's pretty much it. All right, so I'll bottom these out. These have torque specs, but I'm just gonna bottom it out, snug it, and call it done. I'm just gonna check them. All right, so now that we're done with the front valve cover, I'm gonna go ahead and do the rear, and just to not forget, I'm gonna put the dipstick back in right now. Everything's good, the dipstick's seated all the way, oil cap is tight, valve cover's clean, no leaks. Let's move along. Alright, so I did the rear valve cover. It's all set. I made sure that the gasket isn't pinched when I bolted it in. Now it's time to put the upper intake back on. So remove your paper towels or whatever you covered up the lower intake with, and make sure the gasket is clean. No debris here. Again, if you want to replace it, go right ahead, but this one is fine to reuse. Make sure that this surface right here is clean. It's smooth. I know the gasket should be formed to this already, but any sort of corrosion will prevent the gasket from seating all the way, and will create vacuum leaks. And even if you get a new gasket, obviously still make sure that this is nice and flat. If you have a sanding block and you know it's perfectly flat, you can just slightly scuff up the surface with a fine grit sandpaper like 400 or something, maybe some 320, and just lightly scuff up the surface, and that'll get rid of this corrosion. But other than that, don't touch it because you might ruin it. All right, line up the two studs that go through, and there we go. At this point, you can go ahead and start all your hardware. I'm going to start with the two nuts that secure the intake in place. Then I'm going to drop all the bolts in, snug them, and then we'll torque them to manufacturer specifications. All these bolts are the same, by the way, so there's no need to keep them all apart. Start them all by hand. Once I'm sure that they're all started in and not cross-threaded, I'm going to just bottom them out with my impact because it's faster. Now I'm just going to give them a little snug, going from the inside out. I think I accidentally didn't when I did it with the impact, but they're not actually tight. Now is when it matters. Alright, let's get the torque specs. So the torque for these is 16 foot-pounds. I'm going to set my torque wrench to 16, and let's torque them down, and I'm going to go from the inside out. Let's double check it one last time, and this time you can go in whatever order you want. Alright, torqued. Let's move on to this cover. Alright, so if you have a new gasket for this, this is the time to replace it. I don't, so I'm just gonna hope that this one does the trick, which it probably will. It's a steel gasket. Drop this down. Obviously make sure the surfaces are clean. That's the least you could do, which I already did, so I know I'm all set with that. Now, I got a bunch of small bolts to put in and snug up. I'm sure this has a torque spec, but whatever it is, it's too low to care. So just snug it. Alright, it's time to connect electrical things and whatever else you disconnected, vacuum hoses. This one over here. As you can see, I cleaned up the intake a little bit just so I can look a little prettier. Double check all your vacuum hoses. It's important to make sure that they're all where they are supposed to be. Connect this in just so I can hold it in place, and then put in the bolts. Oh, I just noticed this one. I'm going to connect it before I forget. That's the EGR. Alright, snug these up. Get these back off. Alright, make sure these surfaces are clean here. Slide the throttle body in. There is a connector right here. That goes here. I'm going to connect it before I forget. And your bolts go on the bottom, and the two nuts on the top. Alright, so snug these up. I'm not sure what the torque is, so as long as you snug it up tight, it should be fine. I'm going to guess somewhere in the 15 to 20 foot-pound area, but I'm just going to go with tight as tight. At this point we have the ECT here, electronic throttle control, plug that in, make sure it clicks. Every other hose is plugged in, or connected I should say. All the, oops, this one's twisted right here. I don't like that. There we go. That's better. Let's put this cover on. I don't like these engine covers. I want to see the engine, not a piece of plastic. I don't know where my screwdriver is, so I'm going to use my pry bar and lock these in. At this point, we have to put the air filter housing back on and the intake tube, which I did get a new one because you probably remember what happened when it came out. It's not really my fault that it broke. It was already broken, and I tried to patch it twice, actually. It was broken right at the seam right here, and I wrapped it with tape. It held for a while, then it didn't, so I taped it again. It held, then it didn't. Anyway, so I just got a new one. And this one is a lot more flexible. Like the old one was super, super tough and not malleable at all. This one is nice and flexible. So pliers, there we go. That's gonna have to get squeezed like that. Slide this on. Make sure your clamp is loose enough so this can slide over. There we go. That's stupid. I don't know how they expect you to do that. There we go. So this has a little notch right here they have to line it up with, as well as right here. That's perfect. This hose is on, hose clamp is on. And this, you just make it snug. Make sure to not over tighten this, because once you strip these clamps, it's garbage. Just gotta get a new one. All right, 8mm. Let's tighten all these bolts. Make sure your air filter gasket isn't pinched. If this doesn't seat right, which mine did, if yours doesn't seat right, then it's probably the air filter gasket that's pinched in there. All right, now before we continue, I'm gonna take care of this nonsense right here. This is horrible, and I can't get myself to even try to start it like this, just because it's horrible. So I'm gonna take the battery out, clean it, put it back in, and then I'll come back for a first start. So a few minutes later, we got a clean battery. I'm gonna connect the positive and then the negative. Now we're gonna tighten them both up. All right, so we have completed the job, although not fully. I like to finish this up with an oil change. The car's due for an oil change anyway, so might as well. I'm gonna go ahead and do an oil change, and I'll just bring you through the steps really quick, and then we can finish up. So first things first, I like to pull the dipstick out, open up the oil cap, set it right here, or wherever, and now we're gonna jack up the car, start draining the oil. All right, oil drain plug is a 17mm. Give it a little couple taps, should break free. If you turn the wheels to the right, you gain access to the oil filter. That's right there. Just remove that. It shouldn't be super tight. Make sure you center your drain pan. And then once it's broken loose, give it a nice long spin. And it's going to want to drain. Let it drain for a while, then take it off all the way. Once you got your new filter filled up and you got your O-ring lubricated, go ahead and thread that on, snug it, and then once it's snug, give it like half a turn or 3/4 as it says on the oil filter itself. There we go, that's good right there. Perfect. Let's put the drain plug in and go fill it up. All right, so get your oil drain plug in, then we'll clean everything up. As you can see, it made a little bit of a mess here from the filter. The filter always drips onto the subframe and the control arm, so it always makes a mess. Snug it up. This has a torque spec to it, but if you just make it snug, you should be fine. I forgot to mention, but just double check your gasket, make sure it's still good. I'm reusing this one because it's fairly new, so it's okay to be reused. Just give it a couple taps. Should be good to go. Now it's important to clean all this up, because if you have any leaks in the future and you don't clean up, you don't know if it's a leak or just you leaving a mess. So. All right, now that the car's back on the ground, go ahead and fill it up. This car is going to take the whole 5 quarts of this container, so just empty it all out in there. I'm going to grab a funnel just because I don't want to make a mess. Super important, make sure your funnel is clean and free of debris. That goes for both the inside and the outside, because anything that's on the outside can potentially fall into the engine. This engine takes 5W20. I'm using Castrol Edge high mileage. And usually I go with the Castrol GTX high mileage, but they didn't have that in stock, so I just went with the Edge. Put the oil cap back on. Now let's clean off the dipstick, check the oil level before we started, just to make sure it's all good, and then we'll start it up. Make sure you put the dipstick down all the way. It has a couple notches that it has to go over. So you probably can't see on camera, but it's just over the full mark, which is fine because it hasn't been started yet. And once you start it, all the oil will travel up into the engine. The car's been sitting for a few days. Plus the oil filter isn't completely full. So everything that's over the full mark is basically just gonna fill up the oil passages and the filter, and it should be good to go. So let's get in and start it up. All right, so the car is running, no leaks that I can see. Everything is nice and quiet. There's no check engine light on the dash that I can see. If there is, that means you probably forgot to plug something in which case just go over all your connections, all your vacuum hoses if it's not running right, and just make sure that everything is plugged in, connected, clamped down, everything is right. Hopefully this helped you out, and hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave me a comment below if you have anything to say. If not, then stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.